Hello and welcome to ClapperCast. I'm your host as always, Carson Timar, and today myself and Mr. Editor-in-Chief Jak-Luke Sharp are off to the races as we review the Wachowskis' Speed Racer, a film that is definitely a unique one when it comes to narrative and visual presentation. On release, this is definitely a film that was a little bit ahead of its time, but has since gained a cult following and is a feature we are both massive fans of. We think, to be honest, this is like an underrated masterpiece, and today we get into the meaning of the film, not only why it's a really unique adaptation of the original anime series, but also we get into what this means for the Wachowskis and some of the narrative depths that are lying beneath the surface. This is a very fun episode, a very strong film, and definitely one that just brings a smile to my face. Thank you so much for listening and supporting us here on the podcast. Now let's get to our review of Speed Racer. Okay, Jack, thank you so much for joining me today. A really fun treat we have. We've done Halloween. The horror movies are behind us. We get to enjoy, I hope we're going to have a joyful conversation today because we are covering Speed Racer from the Wachowskis. Obviously, filmmakers you have a deep connection with. Love The Matrix. We've talked about The Matrix here. Also, extensively, you and us have talked about these films on Uncut Gems. You just did one on Anatomy of an Adaptation. This is a big director for you and a project that I've been wanting to talk about on this podcast forever because it's so unique, and I think it's so there's a lot to get into, I guess, is what I will say. But first, I'll turn it over to you because you're the stan here. I'm curious, what were your thoughts back in 2008 upon release, considering this is fresh off the Matrix trilogy? I think a lot of audiences at that time maybe struggled with that jump from that project to this project. What were your thoughts at the time, and then where are you on Speed Racer today?
Well, as sanctimonious as it is, I probably was one of those people. I think in 2006-07, I think the Pirates of the Caribbean films had just finished, and then there was sort of this large gap of cinematic expression which came through the superhero genre. So I remember in obviously I never watched Batman Begins at the cinema, and then in 2008 you had Iron Man and you had The Dark Knight, and I remember going to watch The Dark Knight in Huddersfield. I remember going to go watch which is just a cinema in the next town, and I remember watching Iron Man with my dad, and Speed Racer never came up. And I think for a long time, being a major fan of the three Matrix films, I think I very much was in the camp of wanting to have something similar. And it's only when you get older and you see more of who these two people are, the Wachowskis, and ultimately their direction and their expressions and the sentimentality and just how they see through the prism of cinema, I can understand the decision why they made Speed Racer. But I think it actually goes back a little bit more from 03-04. I think there's a few things. Just we speak about this a lot to give context to Wachowskis, but there's a few things that happen after the Matrix trilogy where I think there's a few issues with the production of Revolutions. I think the producers, the Wachowskis, and I think some of the cast go as far as they can, and I think they go as far with the film as they can, end it on good terms. But I think there's cracks there, and I think one is namely with Keanu Reeves. I think the other one is Joel Silver, and then there's the Wachowskis. I think after that, I think the Wachowskis struggled to find the next thing, and I think Warner Brothers was slightly concerned with issues of going into more original IP because of the success of the first Matrix, but then the slow critical decline, let's say, of the sequels, which I think in retrospect has not really been not necessarily appropriate, but very much like Speed Racer sort of was very much off the boil. But anyway, back to the point. So the Ultimate became sort of the Warner Brothers two creative people behind the scenes, because they did uncredited rewrites of The Invasion, which starred Daniel Craig and Nicole Kidman. I also think they shot some second unit for that as well. Then they also produced and adapted Alan. Oh my God, Alan. Oh, what's his name? I've just read loads of his stuff. Alan Moore's V for Vendetta graphic novel. produced and adapted for the screen, but didn't direct. And there's a lot of things behind closed doors there, where did they do the second unit sequences or not? I'm not too sure. I think that's still up in the arms. But then after that, I think there's a little bit of a delay, and then they get brought on the Speed Racer, and I think Speed Racer is something that they didn't go to, but Warner Brothers went to them, which I find quite interesting. But if in the context of the Wachowskis' filmography, it makes sense after Bound, which is as an R-rated feature, the Matrix trilogy, which is very hardcore and also R-rated, to somewhat desensitize the viewing public and go for a more um, a level playing field and go for a more energetic and engaging audience. And genuinely on retrospect, I can't not fault this film whatsoever. When you look at the thesis of this, and it's simpler, engage with, have a preconceived original IP that's adaptable, which is a Speed Racer cartoon that's very much more Americanized and is in Europe, I believe. So it was difficult to sell it here anyway, but in America and in the Asian markets, I think it did quite well. And then you've also got the idea of like corporate issues, like it's so very much just there for them to take away, because you open yourself up to a wide range of an audience, which is ultimately children. And then the abstract is that's where the Wachowskis come in and just blow people's minds with the idea of cinema is, it should be renegade. Art is consistently through the years adaptable through paintings and stuff like that, and architecture. But cinema has ultimately retained itself in very much regulated rules, especially in visualization. And I think this is one of very few films. I think another one would probably be Tron Legacy a few years later, that in an era that is just utterly devoid of um, artistic expression, and then slowly but surely gets chopped up into, well, this producer does this, we can't have someone do this, this is a cinematographer this. There's a very lack of expression, namely with certain genres that take over. This is so refreshing to watch, and even almost 20 years down the line, there's very few films that even can touch this. So at the time, to make it to simplify it, I don't think I was quite ready for it. I don't think if anyone brought this up, I would have been interested to watch it at the cinema. But now it's probably one of my biggest regrets. I have not seen this on a big screen, and any chance I might get, I will go and do that, because it is like some. I remember someone like said years and years ago, it's like Skittles in your eyes for 2 hours, and yeah, it is, and I quite like that. It's like a kaleidoscope of image. It's just it just never. This film is just never visually breathes. It's just amazing to watch, and it was one of the first Blu-rays I ever bought with a HD television, just so I could watch the colours. And I don't think I've ever watched this film in the justice that it deserved in a cinema screen. So it's the one thing I'd adore to see it, or at least try watch it on 4K. But I think, again, like I said, in retrospect, coming back to this and watching it, and obviously, again, not so long ago, watch Cloud Atlas, and then you have like the Jupiter Ascendings, and then Matrix Resurrections. There's obviously certain lineages that run throughout about corporate, social political issues and corporate capitalism and conglomerates. It's all there, and Speed Racer very much takes the chunk of it, wraps it round for what 4 to 15-year-olds, and I just think it came out probably maybe at the wrong time. I think now well, I don't know. Look at Tron. Look at Tron Legacy at the time. 2 years later, these are interesting films that is probably aimed at an audience that is accepting of it. But then I just don't think people are quite ready to accept the ideas of, and not even ideas, but look at something that's strange or different or just slightly perplexing. And then, obviously, in hindsight, it is an interesting vehicle. I don't know. It very much indicts the audience that we're having issues with now. And I think Speed Racer was one of the very few films that was ultimately this is gonna sound horrific, but ultimately the beginning of the end, with audiences wanting to. I know you're laughing; it's so miserable, isn't it? But I do think Speed Racer is one of the few films at the beginning where there's an era that things just change, and I think audiences become susceptible of just accepting things and not wanting to look at things that are different or abstract or compelling and on a visual medium. I don't know. It'd be interesting to you're a little bit younger than me, so and that's me being kind. So I'm interested to know your opinion because obviously I was a Wachowski fan, and Speed Racer was just a massive gap for me. I didn't really go back into the Wachowskis during that era until Cloud Atlas when I was about 16, 15, 16, and that was like, oh my god, I get it. Like I was at the age now where obviously your body changes and then you're looking at different things, your hormones, you're questioning a lot of things, and Cloud Atlas came at the perfect time. And I think if I'd have watched Speed Racer those 4 years when I was about 10 or 11 or 12, I think it would have been really interesting to know what my feelings on cinema would have been at the time. But you're just not, I wasn't conscious enough, Carson. I wasn't the stan that I am today, and I want to apologise for that, everyone. But I'm fascinated to your opinion if you came to this late or whenever.
No, I did come to this late, but I do have an explicit memory, like of going to Blockbuster, I believe, with my dad or whatever. And like I remember the advertising for this, and maybe they were playing like a little clip or a trailer or something for it. And it would look, I mean, it looks absolutely insane. I wish I saw this as a kid. I think overall that's one of my biggest things with Speed Racer is there's so little documentation of like what do kids feel about this. I'm fascinated at a kid's reaction. Then I'm curious a kid's reaction now with like TikTok and everything. How would kids respond to just the madness that is Speed Racer? But again, I do remember the advertising, but I didn't come to this until late, and then this was my second time watching it. And I think the first time, even though I love The Matrix, really respect the Wachowskis, I also think on release there was definitely some like conversation and like tabloids about certain parts of their identities that were coming out. I feel like I remember that also happening around the time, at least certain conversations around that maybe being forced out or being speculated on, that maybe led to some controversy. But I really am happy I revisited this. Even on a first viewing, I remember it took me the visuals and the style and the presentation all really hits in a way that, I mean, obviously this film is unlike anything you've seen before on the scale. It is insane. I also wish I could just go see it at a theater, and we'll get more into those visuals. But then on this watch, it really hit me like how moving I think the story is, and it's very similar to the newest Matrix film actually. And as you mentioned, the Wachowskis throughout their filmography are often self-reflective or reflecting the situation they are in or the industries they are engaging with. But this story about like an artist whose brain is just wired to create this certain type of art and going through these motions of trying to go against like the corporations, and you have to do it a certain way, and this idea of if you just drive fast enough, if you are good enough, if you have good enough of a team and stay pure enough, you can overcome that system, that industry. There's obviously, I think, a lot of beauty there in the concept of filmmaking and the Wachowskis as filmmakers. Tragic that then that story ended up bombing pretty big. I don't think this film did necessarily well here. I don't know how it did overseas where Speed Racer is more popular, because I don't think Speed Racer is overly huge here in America, at least with kids at the time. I think maybe it was earlier. I think those people grew up by the time that this film released. But really, really great film. I like on this round loved it to a point that I didn't love it even the first time I saw it. I do think it's one that gets better with the rewatches. But as far as memory go, yeah, it left an impression. So I guess that's something about the iconography here, that I do have that memory of it. But yeah, no, I did not come to this until much later.
It's funny you mention about the Blockbuster because I have a similar story that when Blu-rays were like when I was like buying Blu-rays for the first time, like 2011, 2012, or maybe a bit earlier than that. There was like some charity shops, or not charity shop, but like secondhand, and they'd sell like hundreds of Blu-rays. I remember buying like the Godfather, the trilogy on Blu-ray there, and they had like 18 copies of Speed Racer, and they were all like £1 or £2, which back then is like really cheap for a Blu-ray, which is like $3 or $4. And I remember like it was just they were everywhere on Blu-ray. It was 2 or 3 years after the fact. It was the presentational disc to look to showcase the digital market, obviously with a few others. But I remember Speed Racer being like one of the first big things. and it's just at that time where it was probably 2 or 3 years before the digital boom, and a few years after when digital was first presented with the Attack of the Clones.
Mm.
So it's an interesting one. But going back onto the production of Speed Racer, it's an interesting one within the lifespan of Wachowskis, because after in '03, when they refused to do any interviews for the sequels, and they're very much in the behind the scenes of the first Matrix film, and then just disappear. They go underground. Obviously, in retrospect, that's with Lana Wachowski's journey, um, and but at the time, there's there's a lack of communication, not communication, but there's a lack of knowledge on that, and also there's a lack of a relationship between let's say the Wachowskis and the press, which is a good thing, and I think the latter ultimately sort of went very much knee deep into that, and that the Wachowskis make a new film. But the Wachowskis never did any production on this. It was all shot in any production interviews or anything like that. I remember that there's no director's commentary here. The behind the scenes is interesting because there's very few visuals of Lana and Lily, but obviously at a different stage of their life. Aside from I believe the cast speaking very highly of them, so they're very restricted to be on camera, which is interesting. But also at that age, well, when I was at my age, then it wasn't necessarily something to be interested in. But I think at the time, there's then this conversation of like, well, the press are sort of getting quite not getting the fingers in or getting the nails in, but they're digging it slightly deeper. And it's only, I think, until Cloud Atlas where I think Lana Wachowski comes out loud and proud in the like now infamous Berlin press conference during the production of Cloud Atlas um, to the world. But I think Speed Race is an interesting film within their lifespan, because Cloud Atlas is ultimately the one about different bodies and expression and about interconnected. Then you get into, again, the Matrix on retrospect is all about a trans allegory. Speed Racer is an interesting one because there's not really a conversation there about them two as people, aside from being ultimately a palate cleanser. And when you see it like that, you see two people who are, even if it's conscious or subconscious, are, excuse me, crafting an abstract that is purely through artistic interpretation. And I think that in its own right is quite freeing. But to make that film and have no issue, not necessarily have any issues, but not having to, not feeling a need to project subconsciously or consciously that allegory um, upon the material, if again, if it's conscious or not, I'm sure there's bits in here. I think there's also, on retrospect, quite an interesting conversation about brotherhood in this film, which at that time during production probably would have been quite an interesting and um, not necessarily tough, because I can't speak for that, but I can imagine it was uh, difficult a terminology, which is probably not fair either. But it would have been any I don't know how I would express that. It would have been a time, let's say, for the two of those siblings to find one another and find themselves, and ultimately, Lana Wachowski became Lana Wachowski um, throughout that era. And I think it's quite an interesting one about just creating and putting things on screen that haven't been done before, making a kaleidoscope. And then when the production finishes, I think it was $120 million, and it made 93 worldwide. So I think you could probably argue throughout its length, it may have broken even. But I remember the 2 or 3 years after that, Warner Brothers actually gave them uh, the time to make a sequel to that film as well. Because I remember in 2009 and 10, they were actually publicly commenting on it. And I remember Christina Ricci coming out and saying, like, yeah, we're going to make another one. Like, we're talking to the Wachowskis now, we're going to make another one. And I remember it's only when The Matrix Resurrections came out, Christina Ricci was doing, like, not press because she's in it like 2 minutes, but someone asked her about it. She said, "Oh, like, I would meet up with Lana Wachowski, and we're like, when are we going to make Speed Racer?" And they were like, "Oh, we're going to make it soon. Don't worry, we're going to make it soon." So I think there's still and an affection for it, and I think Lana Wachowski and I think Lily Wachowski, on retrospect, if you've listened to the Academy Award conversation with Lily Wachowski when they talk about the Matrix trilogy and stuff like that, I think she goes into detail about that they just Warner Brothers just like shat on them, like they gave the project to them, they did something with it, and I think during production, I know, sorry, I'm going on here, and I'll stop in a second, or but there's I think during production, they were like, they were horrified of what the Wachowskis were doing, and I think they took them aside with Joel Silver and said, and I'm paraphrasing here because I've read a book that Lana Wachowski actually states this in as well, that they were perplexed that Warner Brothers pulled them aside and were like, "What are you doing?" And she was like, "You've given us this film. This is what we do." And they couldn't understand that, Warner Brothers. And I think during the production of that film, you speak about Lana Wachowski's journey. I think there's also an issue that arises with Joel Silver here, because this is getting like too deep into the Wachowski mythology here, but, and I know I must have said this on multiple podcasts, but when the sequels of The Matrix came out, Joel Silver did press. Now, I don't know why a producer is doing press that much, but I remember when they were first shown on ITV in England, he did 5-minute intervals before the films to talk about them. Now, a producer doing that is quite rare, very rare. That would be like James Gunn doing it for the DCU now, which is like trendy. But back then, just Joel Silver doing that, and I think the Wachowskis didn't particularly like him being a spokesperson at the time for the films that needed to be spoken for themselves. And I think with Speed Racer, that 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 relationship, that triangle relationship between studio, Joel Silver, and the Wachowskis, I think just broke down, especially when there was issues of V for Vendetta happened, because there were certain people making statements about talking to Alan Moore, and Alan Moore sued Warner Brothers over it, and then I think tried to sue Lana Wachowski, I think, and then they had to retract certain statements, and I think the Wachowskis felt they were held at gunpoint, and I think their relationship just ultimately crumbled because Joel Silver doesn't come back to with Jupiter Ascending or Cloud Atlas, and then ultimately even with The Matrix, and then with his own private life, you can go read up about it. So again, back to the point, but it I think it's an interesting film to look at, but it doesn't. It's also one that feels like really freeing when you look at the Wachowskis, because it doesn't feel like it has. And this is going to again sound quite dramatic and a lack of expression, but it doesn't feel like it's filled with a slight energy of not trauma, but of genuine emotional weight. If that's again conscious or subconscious. And the only other film that feels very similar is Jupiter Ascending, and they're both very abstract pieces on conventional stories, and it's the only two pieces throughout their filmography that doesn't feel like it's got a considerable amount of weight that's going on behind the scenes. And then obviously Sense8 goes into a lot more other things, and then obviously Resurrections. But I hope that I know I've gone on a massive tangent there, but to keep it really simple, I think Speed Racer again is an interesting entry in the filmography, purely because I don't think it actually has a lot of great thematic weight that the Wachowskis usually put their own subconscious into, because ultimately art is inherently political, but I think it's also consciously um, uh, internal as well, which goes out to the external. So this is just purely art. This is just they're just going for the hills here, and again, it is one of those films where you can just literally watch it from moment to end, moment to end. I could watch this twice a day, oh, so easily. And I'll throw it to you because I feel like I'm going on and on and on there.
No, I mean, absolutely. I could watch this all the time. I actually disagree with you, though, because I do think there's a lot of emotion here. I do think on the first viewing, I would agree with you. But on this new viewing, not only is there this bit of the artist, but you mentioned this relationship between these two brothers. And specifically, not to get into spoilers, I guess spoilers for Speed Racer if you haven't seen it in the last 20 years. You have the one brother who has had surgery and transformed his
Well,
face and
yes,
taken on some
yes, yes.
identity. And then there's this whole conversation there. And how do you live with that weight? And how do you live with that, I guess, trauma, if you want to say, or how do you live with that identity? But then also the fact that he's totally different, but they still have this connection.
Yeah.
And again, I think there's so much here about the power of family, which is a common theme for the Wachowskis. I think there's so much here about independent art versus signing with a big company and then having to create your art under that guise. I disagree. I think there's a lot here, but I will say, first and foremost, this is a kids' film, and I think that's probably where a lot of people don't necessarily appreciate it, or they're willing to reject it. It also is, you mentioned 2008, it's the antithesis of every blockbuster at the time. This is not dark and gritty like The Dark Knight. It's not realistic like Iron Man. This is fully committed to just being a live action anime in a way that we've never seen before. And anime is huge and blowing up and doing box office records now. But I think when it comes to actual adaptations of that style, yes, you get a little bit here from like Robert Rodriguez, or I think about the Japanese director whose name escapes me, but he did House and he did A Labyrinth of Cinema. There's been people in
Kiyoshi,
filmmakers, exactly, yes. There's been pieces like that that really play with visuals, and they play with this idea of abstraction or of fictionalizing a world. And here, everything is green screen. There's so much CGI. Most of it looks terrible, but like it works so well because that is the style. And I love the story of the Wachowskis. They were getting the camera lens they were going to use, and it was like a newer lens at the time, and they were like, but it doesn't look cinematic, like you don't want this lens, no one does. And they're like, no, we don't want it to look cinematic, we don't want it to look like a normal feature. And the editing, again, it crazy transitions throughout. Again, every single thing is in focus. There's no depth of field. It's constantly playing around. When it does go out of focus for a bit, like I think when he's a young boy and he sees her and everything in the background turns to hearts. There's so much here that is inspired filmmaking, but it never it never contorts itself, I guess, to the expectations of what film would be at the time. So I get why most people would reject it. There's also just like a lot of crazy young boy with monkey running around on a sugar rush, which I think only really interrupts one scene for me where that gets to a point of not being great.
We'll get into that as well, because
yes, we will.
There's a few bits there. I'm shocked that I that totally slipped my mind about the I totally the Racer X with the surgery, that totally slipped my mind. So I will concede that you're totally right. And I also think as well about an era, about perhaps it's very difficult to speak for these two people, because I have so much affection for them. In the same token, it's not something I feel. It's very difficult. I don't want to speak for them. It's not that's not what I'm here for. But I can only imagine during that period about self reflection and finding oneself, having to write about two parents loving their children unconditionally, is it would have been quite not traumatizing, but even rewarding, an emotional rewarding time, and quite a heavy weight to deal with, because there's a certain monologue here where Susan Sarandon and Emile Hirsch talk, and it's gut punching for a kids movie. Susan Sarandon here is just absolutely outstanding. It's devastating, like she just totally commands it, and it's a film where there's very few pause and reflects. Namely, I think there's three. I think when the eldest son walks out for the first time, then when Speed Racer walks out, and then the one with the Susan Sarandon, and each one of them, again, both with the parents, one from John Goodman's side, with the father, who's from St. Louis, next door neighbor to Chicago, where the Wachowskis are from. Susan Sarandon there, a motherly figure, I think is genuinely sort of devastating to watch. There's something about that where you can tell from the writing perspective that there's the digging somewhat quite deep there. But I only mean about the sort of the quite deep with the trans allegory. But even then, I think there's a lot about, you said about like the Warner Brothers issue, where a company comes in and we've got this, we've got that, we've got this or that. But it's not the team that you made when you were doing it with the Burlyman Productions, which is the Wachowski Productions. It's just not the same. And they did the same with the comic books, and they did with stuff with Hellraiser. they started very small, and then as soon as their names got quite large, they ultimately sort of forgot about those projects. Not in a naivety way or an ignorance, but purely because people were then buying it because it's like it's the Matrix. Directors and not about who they were as artists. And I think this film speaks quite highly of that in a certain degree as well, if not quite on the nose. And it'd be interesting to know if you ask them the mechanical, the sort of race guy who also is in V for Vendetta as well. There's a lot of overcasting here with the Wachowskis. One thing, if the Wachowskis like, they use you a lot, which is a good thing. There's Susan Sarandon's a lot of stuff. Obviously Christina Ricci and all sorts, but uh, you can tell. It'd be interesting to know the antagonist here, who's the billionaire, who that is perhaps based on, and I think it's the same initials as myself. I think, although it could be a multitude of different people. But I mean, if you put that release now, we'd all know who that was. It'd be Musk, wouldn't it? These evil people. It's just written to be so almost as a caricature, but it works in any era. But yeah, I think it very much touches on a lot of Wachowski stuff that's going to blossom to a degree where I think it turns a lot of people off in a few years because it's quite heavy-handed. But here, it's very much the quintessential tale of we want to be a mom and pop store, and we don't want Toys R Us to buy us, or we don't want Walmart to buy us. And it's very far ahead of its time. But again, to your earlier point about it looking like amazing, in an era of the superhero becoming quite dark and realistic with the Dark Knight, and obviously not necessarily realistic, but more of a down to earth representation with Iron Man. I can't believe that this thing wasn't just shown everywhere. Why was it not on billboards with the kaleidoscope imagery, yellow, blues, whites? I can imagine going into the foyer at Leicester Odeon, and just like in London and Leicester Square, sorry, not at the Odeon. Why was this just not everywhere? It has such vibrant iconography, imagery, posters, the white, the red. It to me, it's sort of like I think the argument about it's a tough film to advertise. Bullshit. I think just the imagery of this sells itself, and it's just one of those things where it's so perplexing to look back and be like, how did this not make $400 million at least? Because it sells itself on imagery. It's very friendly. You can take your parents to watch it and the kids and get something out of it. It's 2 hours of just non-stop visual fantasy that is genuinely compelling at each and every turn. Like you said, the editing here is extraordinary. Like I can understand why they never wanted to go back to this because it was done. Like they did it. Those
Yeah.
people like, oh, why does nothing ever look like Speed Racer? Because Speed Racer looks like Speed Racer, and nobody else is silly enough or crazy enough to achieve that, and they did it. So why would they ever go back? And I think it speaks a lot more proudly for them to be like, well, we achieved what we wanted to do, and they didn't back us, and an audience wasn't ready for it. And I think they've been proven right almost 2 decades on from it. But
Yep.
to me, it's fascinating to know when you look at films and they're quite good and interesting, but they don't seem to do very well. And I named Tron Legacy as well, which is like has one of the best iconographies in the last few years, has one of the best scores put to screen by Daft Punk in years. The two very similar films 2 years apart that just didn't seem to bang, and I just find it perplexing. I mean, 08 and 2010 were strange times, but yeah.
I mean, there will never be another race in the history of cinema that captures what the end of this film captures with its final race. That moment, that size, those colors, it's like the way I described me seeing on IMAX the final scene of Babylon, that final montage. I said like, oh, it's so orgasmic and it works so well for some reason. Like it goes as far as you possibly can, but still sticks the landing. Speed Racer is one of the few scenes I think would just overpass that in a theater if I saw it for the first time, especially in a theater. That final race is just like, it's truly one of the most stunning scenes in like the history of cinema, I would say.
Yeah.
I will say point about advertising, everyone I would recommend, please look up on YouTube. I'm so mad. I missed this because obviously I was too young and I didn't live in LA. At the LA Metro, the underground subway, they had during in between stops outside the windows, it would flash the colors and it would
Oh
flash
wow!
a speed racer ad. It looked incredible. Again, someone captured on YouTube, but like, man, if I could have gone back and lived in that time. I do want to mention two other conversations in here that I found to be pretty beautiful in a way and poetic. First up, definitely there's stuff here to be said about ADHD, the fact that this kid cannot study on this test or can't focus on this test, and all he thinks about and all he feels like he was born to do is race. I think that's a really beautiful angle to take the story in. Plays around with it and also explains a lot of the chaos that we see when you think about it through the lens of being through a boy with ADHD. Also, I like the fact that, yes, it is this mom and pop anti-corporation, and oh my god, we don't want to be bought out by Walmart or whatever you want to say. But it also was like very honest about the debate of like, well, to make this art, to continue to race or make whatever art you want to make, you have to win. You have to have those resources. If you don't have the backing of those resources, you don't get a film made or you don't get your race car put in the race. I like the fact that there's a more mature take on that, and while it still, yes, is, you know, stand with your family, it has that good message, it is a little bit more complex than I think a lot of other kids movies would take it. So I appreciate that for sure.
Oh, 100%. And also as well, there's like a very much conscious conversation there about share prices dropping, and this coming out in '08, which is the worldwide financial crisis. I think it's an interesting conversation to be like, no matter who wins this race, no matter if this film fails or succeeds, someone else, probably at Warner Brothers, is betting against it. And I think it's such an interesting conversation to have, because that's just like at the point of time, it's just so far over people's heads. But there's digs there, or not even digs, but just like planting the flag in the sand, and stating like, we've got a lot to lose by this, but there's other people who are making this, who just use it as a tax write off. It's quite fascinating to do, but it's very pulpy. It's very over. It's not pulpy, but it's very like overindulgent in performance. It's very theatrical. It has to be, but it just, like you said, it hits its marks. But there's a lot of conversations about identity, like you said. But I think as kids as well, about destiny, and that people should be engaged with what they want to do in life, and again, to use certain imagery in the film to not necessarily like dumb it down, but make those things just simplistic, I think is really fun to watch as well. I don't think this film takes itself quite seriously. I think it, having watched the obviously the issues of the franchise and the Matrix taking itself too seriously that a lot of people state, this is quite refreshing to that degree as well. But again, there's a lot to gravitate towards here. I think that the kid performs like a young performer, Ariel Winters, in this as well. Like that's strange still to watch. Um, there are certain misgivings in it. I think though. I think the monkey and the young kid is like got to be a kid thing, hasn't it? And if you watch the behind the scenes, them two are like very much front and center. If you read about the production, there's issues with the monkey, certain issues, and it feels like there's always a certain issue in production. The next few productions that Wachowskis have, is namely this and Cloud Atlas and certain things, and maybe it's just an era of its time, but it's the one thing I think that infantiles the production slightly as well, because I think once you have a monkey in production, it's like when you have like, it just reminds me of like Ace Ventura or something like that. I think it goes to a point where, oh, it's a film for kids. I don't know if that's a reality. I don't know if that's me projecting, but I always think that if there's an animal involved like that, it's somewhat infantile, because all the kids' movies at a certain age, it's like, oh, like when Tom Hanks was at that dog, when he plays a cop and stuff like that. They're all very kid friendly stuff, and when someone has like a little monkey and stuff in a film, I don't know. I don't know how you feel about that, but to me, it seems to be like an era of when I was a kid where every video VHS had like something like that, and that's probably one thing that deterred me at the time, and probably still does now. Although
Sure.
that child actor is never boring, and it's never infantile in certain stages of like, he's probably one of the characters who knows what's going on more than anyone else, because he's investigating things and stuff like that. So I do quite like that side of it. It doesn't really do anything silly about it. The one thing that was interesting to me for a long period is like the Racer X casting is something that's always been slightly interesting to me, because I remember watching it, and when they both race each other in the third act, or before that, maybe just when to breach the second and third act, he questions like, "You're my brother," and he's like, "No, I'm not." But there's a monologue that that actor gives, and I can't never remember. Is it Michael? I can never remember his name.
Matthew Fox, I
Matthew Fox,
believe.
because it's Michael J. Fox, sorry. But Matthew Fox gives a delivery of a dialogue, and it's like, that weirdly looks and sounds like Keanu Reeves. And then it was only like a few years later, I was like, oh, he was offered the role. And I think he was slightly fractured after the Matrix sequels, because for a long time after, from what, oh 03 to, I'm going to say 2014, he didn't really do anything. He did like The Day the Earth Stood Still in '08, so he chose to do that instead and didn't want to work with the Wachowskis. He declined the role. I think that was quite. And he also, I don't think he wanted to be a Wachowski muse and vice versa. But that's always an interesting one there, because I think Matthew Fox does a quite a decent job here, because I think he's in the midst, if not at the end of Lost, and then a few years later he goes into what the World War Z and never does anything again. I know he's had a few issues, but I think that casting is quite good as well. There's so much narrative here. Like, it's not just a racing film. It's not just a corporate espionage. It's also like a gangster film and stuff like that. There's so much energy in here, and I can imagine watching this in the cinema when you're about 8, 9, or 10. It is just so overwhelming to a positive state. And again, it just begs the question of, like, I just can't believe this didn't have a boom. It had it had a video game with it as well. It had a video game adaptation. It has all the cartoon series had like a second wind. It's interesting to know of why this just didn't find common ground. I tell you one thing that I was impressed with this time, Carson. I took more notice of the score, and the score has
Mm.
certain musical motifs similar to the Matrix, and especially in the third act. And I found that to be really compelling as well, because it's very childlike as well. It's very I always say this wrong. Is it ethereal? Is that correct? Is that how you
Yeah,
pronounce that?
yeah,
My wife won't
ethereal.
be happy with that. I once said ethereal. Sorry. But yeah, I think that has something to it. There's so much engaging filmmaking here. The only thing, and I'll move on to you after, is I know that the Wachowskis are very private people, and I really appreciate that. They allow the films to speak for themselves. They're not doing seminars about, and I know they have spoke about Matrix, Cloud Atlas, to different degrees. If it's an hour here, a 15-minute interview, a book here, there, and everywhere. I would love to know a 15-part series on the Blu-ray disc, how this was made. I find that would be so fascinating to look at the documentation from start to finish, because a lot of this would have to have been pre-viz,
Yeah.
so they would have had to have known what this was going to look like before they put someone on a green screen. And for two filmmakers who have come into a project and not necessarily blossomed with it, let's say, because it's come to them, not the other way around, in the space of 2 years to have crafted this, I find genuinely fascinating. I don't even find it like how that's humanly possible. How they got this on screen in 2 years with a major, massive production. Don't get me wrong, but that is a visionary. That there are two visionaries there. It's not just one person making the decision; it's two people. I would love to know behind the scenes from start to finish how this was made, and it's the one thing, because there is out there Art of the Speed Racer book, which I should have read before this.
Oh,
I have got it on my iPad. I'm going to read it at work tomorrow, and I just want to know more about it, because I'm also someone, and I know I'm going on here, so I will put it back to you after this. Sorry, but I'm one person that I do feel that there's a lot. You mentioned about the ADHD child in this as well, about visual learners, and this being a visual feature. A lot of people struggle with reading something and then reenacting it. A lot of people are
mm.
visual learners. I really do think that if the Wachowskis sort of when it's not, that's tough to say, because that's who they are as people. But I really do feel like it's a tragedy in one aspect that they weren't a little bit more open to not the press but behind the scenes stuff, because
Yeah.
seeing two people work on a production like this and seeing it get made and built, I think opens up the next 2 or 3 years, especially within the circuit behind closed doors, but also just to see people who watch the behind the scenes who are filmmakers or want to be, who are kids of 15, 15, 16, 17-year-olds, see that it can be done. Because I
Yeah.
can't see how this was made. As to this day, I cannot believe that they managed to do this. Even more so than the likes of Cloud Atlas. Like, that feels like a film that is based on reality. This is, I do not know how they got this made. There are things in here where I cannot believe they managed to get it on screen, which is shocking that 20 years later still feels
Oh yeah.
frighteningly true. I'll move it to you now because I feel like I'm just fucking taking over.
No, I mean I agree with you though. It is insane. I wish there was more behind the scenes stuff, like a mega doc version of this documentary behind the scenes. Because also it's such a big swing, and I'm so curious if those collaborators on set, like, did they just fully buy into this vision? Was there any reservation? Like, as you're seeing this madness come together, I think it's a really, really fascinating story. I also think it's interesting that while yes, this has got a cult following, undeniably, I think the overall perception of this socially is very positive right now. It still is like not really re-released a bunch. It feels like it's destined for this big cultural moment where everyone goes back and reevaluates it. Maybe it's a Criterion, maybe it's just a big re-release, maybe it's some big streaming push, maybe it gets added to Netflix or something. But it feels like even now, although people I think again enjoy it, it hasn't necessarily got like the time of day I think it really deserves. So it's super fascinating. I will say 2 points for things you brought up previously. First off, just again, the casting is fantastic. Emil Hirsch, I was very critical of it with our Into the Wild episode on Anatomy of an Adaptation, but here he's fantastic. John Goodman, also, this is not a shock because I think he's overall a good actor, but I think he's like really quite
Yeah,
powerful in this role. When he has that sit down with Speed, when Speed tries to leave, echoing what happened to his brother, it really gets me. Like, I think it's a really, really strong father performance. Yes, we need to talk about the monkey really quick. Bring it back to the monkey. Also, again, yes, issues on set. Go research them. It's this interesting era we're in where it's like, I get why now we use CGI animals, and yes, it normally looks pretty bad, but like, yeah, maybe it's a good idea here or there. I think that's definitely the part of this film where if I had all my friends come over and I'm like, okay, we're gonna watch Speed Racer, trust me guys, it's really good, I'd probably have to warn them about that. I think it overall lands for me mainly because I think the kid attached to the monkey is really not annoying at all. I think he's really quite
yes,
fun at times, so that saves it. I also know like it's from the anime in a lot of ways. This is like a very direct, stylistic and with characters adaptation of the anime, so like I do want to cut it some grace there. I think the only issue for me is there are some times, specifically that conversation where Speed is giving his answer to the corporation guy, and it cuts from like this really intense conversation to them just running through the halls causing chaos, and then it cuts back like nothing happened. And it's like there are a few moments like that, or right before the big kiss at the end, where it's like I get that it's humorous. A little bit is undercutting of the emotion of those scenes, but also as a kids movie, I see their purpose enough. I guess I'm not bothered by it in the way that I'm bothered by a lot of kids or a lot of monkey performances, I guess we'll say. Not as good as the monkey and Monkey Shines, I have to be honest, but for sure not the worst it could be.
yeah. I watched. I've seen this a few times since release, obviously on Blu-ray. But I watched a different version of it, edited by I forget the name, but the film is titled Go Speed Racer Go, and it's just tighter. And I think I just wanted to see how someone else would look at the material and ultimately look at it and be like, oh, here, there, and watching someone being a big fan of it. That's what this says in the description. They wanted to tighten it up. It is an interesting watch. It does cut out a significant amount of fat, including sort of those scenes that you're talking about. It doesn't change anything else. So it's a tricky one because obviously it's not the artistic vision, but it does take away that infantile aspect to it. But then again, either version I think still works quite well to gravitate towards its audience. Um, but yeah, I go back to your points as well. I think it's a fascinating watch. I really do, and I think It's interesting why this hasn't taken on to that sort of home video boutique label, because obviously the Bound is done by Arrow Video. Um, that I mean, Warner Brothers are not necessarily like usually against stuff like that. I know that Arrow are doing a lot more recent stuff, but why shouldn't this be on a Criterion collection? Why wouldn't this? It feels still to this day a project and even an entry into something that has so much potential that hasn't been realized, and even that's with a video game, a film, a feature film, a pre-existing material, which was what, maybe like 200 episodes, even more maybe. It still feels like unrealized potential to maximize, and look at two filmmakers who made something quite extraordinary. And even to this day, you still hear that anyone who watches this refers to it as it's a visionary masterpiece. Um, the one thing that was interesting with you is, and it's not that it's a tough subject matter, but it would be interesting to get your opinion nevertheless. How do I explain this now? Right, prepare yourself, but do you feel that in a certain culture that we live in, do you feel that perhaps the issue of people looking at the Wachowskis' filmography becomes secondary to who they are as people? So, do you think that Speed Racer is ultimately forgotten about, and the likes of Jupiter Ascending and Cloud Atlas? Because I to put my to put me on the block here, I often find that people want to dismantle and investigate those two filmmakers as people rather than actually look at the films. And it's interesting that obviously being on here and talking about their private lives, which should remain private, but ultimately just talking about in context and conjunction with the films that they make. I do feel that a lot of people will look at them two people and not really take their films seriously, or it becomes secondary. That might be perhaps because of their journeys, which I think is more so that what I'm on about. But I also think that because they're not public people, there is a certain aura of the unknown and therefore acceptance, which then comes again into the conversation about who they are as trans people in a world that finds that difference and the alternate is something to push away because it's not a social norm, that people don't want to break down barriers and therefore put them up. And I feel like throughout their filmography, there's been sort of this instigation of they're just weird, and that Speed Racer's weird, so I'm not really gonna indulge in it. Cloud Atlas, like, why? That's just weird though. And like, have you know what they, like who they are? Like, it's just weird, like weird people making weird films. And I find that sentiment quite not only like genuinely barbaric, but also what a shame, because I think Speed Racer is a feature that you can just tell right now. If it came out now, it would be a trans person making a children's film. No, thank you. That's dangerous to society. That's dangerous to my children. And I think that the fact that they weren't public about who they were, and were ultimately resigned to be behind the scenes, and they let the film speak for itself. I find there's somewhat of a tragedy in that, because what an amazing thing that would be to be like to have that, and it still is now. That can be considered to be a children's film made by two trans filmmakers. But I do feel that their work is relegated to being kooky and therefore not taken seriously. And besides, post 1999, there definitely feels like a line drawn in the sand of like, yeah, but they just went weird. And it's interesting because you could probably, I think, not to keep on going on here, but I do think the opposite. Whereas post 99, they actually became more free, and their work therefore became more freeing. And you can see that the work evolves with the two filmmakers, where this feels very much more infantile because they're free to make things and be expressive, not only perhaps because their identity is more freed, but they don't have this passion project that's been on their shoulders. They can now make something. And then you get into Cloud Atlas and Jupiter Ascending and making fun things, and then just the audience thinking, no. Then making very personal statements with Sense8, and then making even more personal statements with Matrix Resurrections, and then obviously Lou Wachowski and Lana Wachowski making two separate things now. I don't know how you feel about that. I know that's like got a slightly firework assessment, but it'd be interesting to know your opinion, obviously, because well, yeah, go on. I know I don't because I'm just going to keep on going on, but I'm fascinated to know your opinion about that.
No, I mean, I definitely agree to a point. I think they're both individuals who carry such a um, outwardly persona about them. And obviously, the conversation of transness within society, especially at the time where they both were coming out, which is before you got the big boom of visibility, it's always going to be tied to that in some way. I also think it's really difficult because so much of their art reflects something so personal within them that for large streaks of their filmography, if not just all of it, it's really hard to analyze the art and to enjoy the art and appreciate the art and have it exist as completely separate from these two
Mm-hmm.
artists. Like for Speed Racer, for example, right? You do have the visuals and you have this kids film, and there's so much here just to enjoy. But when you break down what it's saying, as we have in this podcast, it's hard to separate that from an understanding of who made it and what they're putting into this. I think that they're both, and I'm sure you would agree with this statement to a degree. I think outside of probably the original Matrix and maybe Bound, I don't know if any of their works has ever really got the conversation or recognition that it deserves. Even those later two Matrix sequels, granted, I think a lot of that was expectations and kind of projections of who the audience was meant to be at the time versus who the filmmakers actually were maybe speaking to and building films for. It is interesting. I think even with this newest Matrix film, I don't know if people really necessarily took it as seriously or took it as valuably as I think they should have. But I also think that's like really talking about mainstream conversations and mainstream audiences and mainstream critics even. I do think that there's been this like underbelly of people who really appreciate and engage with their art from the very beginning. So that's like at least a reassuring. But I do think there's to a point, but also like when you are someone like them who've taken themselves out of the narrative so often, you mentioned when they interviews and such, there's also kind of a natural almost like mythology that forms around you to where it's like, oh, they were away from all these interviews and then they both transitioned, and there's a story there where I get why some people maybe have built them into very unique conversations than compared to other filmmakers of their type or genre.
Yeah, I also think that there's a tandem of them growing as people
Yeah.
and as a trans journey, and also pushing the boundaries of what you can be doing as a filmmaker. And I
Yeah.
think them two have come hand in hand. And I think ultimately there's also somewhat a form of rejection of the one, and therefore vice versa with the other. If that's subconscious or not, I generally do think about that. I think that people reject the, let's say, quote unquote, kookiness of Cloud Atlas, and therefore reject the filmmakers, and vice versa. And I think the same is probably said with with Speed Racer. But what's perplexing, though, I think with Speed Racer is that it's so hard to watch this and not be utterly indulged, and then not to sort of go back to 2008 and be like, what were they thinking? And I mean more critical analysis. Like there's certain imagery in this film where the lighting, and it's all fake lighting. Obviously, it's man-made lighting, and it looks outstanding. There's the reflections on the car, the Mach 5 in white, and it looks to die for. And there's an interesting, I've mentioned this a lot, where Lana Wachowski has said like the first time where they've actually used the natural lighting and not manufactured lighting is in the Matrix Resurrections. So I think it's a beautiful thing about leaving the studio, shooting in San Francisco, you know, and not hiding oneself away from it and shooting in the real openness of the world, and also that coming in tandem with the Matrix itself. I think it's quite poetic. Speed Racer belongs in an era where there is wanting to stay away from the public eye, and therefore let's shoot it in Potsdam, and let's shoot it in London, and then obviously in Berlin, and have the studios, and they did the same with Cloud Atlas and stuff like that, and especially with Jupiter Ascending, although Chicago is a home of old. There's an interesting thing about natural light, and here everything is formulated on a digital edge, and it's an interesting one because these are filmmakers who are purely trying to make something that hasn't been done before, and yet with all the restrictions they have, they make something artificial look real. And I know that might sound like Jack, you're just talking shy, and I probably am, but I think there's something quite interesting there about that journey, about being free and wanting to be who they are, and not feeling right, and then still making imagery and trying to ultimately design and redesign and bring life to something. And I know there's a poetic justice in that, and a poetic tragedy that ultimately has come. Thankfully, that the free and happy people, I'm hoping. But it's an interesting a time of people's lives where the artist's expression is so vivid and fulfilling. Is that sometimes behind closed doors is a different journey. But I think Speed Race is a really enlightening time and a really enlightening piece of material that generally has aged without being hyperbolic here, more so than recent films that cost $300 million from the same fucking studio. I don't know. I think that they are so far ahead of the game with Speed Racer, and people are just catching up now. And I think that if
Yeah.
that's not a testament to who these creatives are as people and as extraordinary visionaries, then I don't know what else to say. The one thing I was going to ask you though is not to contradict anything I've said here, but I also feel like it's a nice thing to have it as being one and done. Do you agree? Like, I'm glad that there's not a Speed
No,
Racer 2, and
absolutely. I don't know.
yeah,
I don't know what else there is. I mean, I've not seen the anime. Maybe there's this whole other world and plot, and actually there is something here. But like, I think we've tackled this to the visual level where I don't know how you could get bigger than this film. I don't know emotionally with these characters if there's anything more that I need from them. I think this is a perfect little gem. I don't think there's anything else that I feel unsatisfied with. That like, oh, I need the sequel for more. And I'm also happy that they went off and made other worthy pieces of art themselves. You know, I don't need them to get stuck in this loop of a franchise or this loop of a series. No, I'm perfectly okay with it. I'll ask you first off the same question, but also we talked a lot about this being a product in 2008. How did it play then? And you mentioned they're still catching up now, audiences and filmmakers. How do you think this film would play if it released just today, ignoring maybe the trans side of it? Because I think you brought that up, and that's
yeah,
sadly, tragically, just you couldn't escape that. But if just this artwork got produced and put out there, how do you think audiences today would react to it?
it'd bomb. It'd make less money, which is tragic. But I think that, as I said in my opening gambit, I think there's a point in time here where, I think after the Pirates of the Caribbean films came out, with Disney, and there's sort of risks there filming that back to back, and 0708, and then with Iron Man banging, like just doing numbers, and then The Dark Knight just blowing it with $1 billion, and then the year later you have Avatar. Things change, and I think that out of all those three films, it's that there's a level of seriousness that now needs to come with the genre of cinematic expression. You can't really have fun with it, and I think the seriousness also comes with Tron Legacy as well, which is you should have a bit more fun with a film like that. But there's a level of maturity that seems to have indulged with those types of films with an era. Um, that's one thing. I think even now that although that I think that the MCU grew to be more fun and a bit more pulpy. It's shocking that Guardians of the Galaxy, the three films, have done so well when you look at something like Speed Racer. and I don't think that they're so far apart in tone and looking at outsiders and the comments therefore on sort of political things, but that's for another conversation. But a film like Guardians of the Galaxy 3 talking quite heavily about animal cruelty, and a film like Speed Racer that's talking quite heavily about conglomerate greed is not necessarily too far away from each other, and one of them extremely successful, although it feels that the problem with Speed Racer and compared to the Guardians of the Galaxy is that that's in a major family arsenal of films that are interconnected, that you have to see this, that and that, and therefore they all have to be seen, and therefore there's more of an issue to go and watch them all, whereas Speed Racer is a one and done, which then goes back to your other question about um, needing more. I think that on an artistic point of view, I think you're right. What could they do? I think with the technological advancement now, this would look slicker. It would probably look better, yes. But what ultimately could you do? You couldn't. I think that there's just so much energy put forward into this, especially through the expression of how this intertwines with itself in editing and so far ahead of its time. I mean, you could ultimately put do an artistic experiment of just of maybe VR or something, and being there in the car, and you could do something like that. But on a cinematic scale here, it feels like the actual medium needs to evolve, and if that's something to do in VR or at that oval thing in Las Vegas, or at least something where you can feel like you're really in this and it's happening all around you. But then again, that feels like more an experiment on a minimal scale of I don't know. It's hard to explain. I just think that how the abstract is as far as you can push it in terms of what you can achieve in the realms and the strict nature of the cinema screen. I'll say that. So therefore, if you're going to do something else with it, if you can't outdo that, which you can't by definition, it's done. Therefore, I think it is. But I think this would make less money now, and I think it would bomb. I just don't think people would be wanting to watch something like this. Um, you know, maybe you could sell it more so in the IMAX sentiment, and have you seen this? Like Speed Racer has to be seen to be believed. Maybe you could galvanize it like that, but like you said, I think that if I just don't have much hope about what an audience would want to gravitate towards. I haven't seen the new Tron. I'm not really bothered, but there are filmmakers out there trying to make interesting pieces of art that people are not susceptible to because the adults reject change. And as you get older, unfortunately, you do you reject the idea of change because you want things to stay the same. And with how things are changing now in the cinematic landscape with AI, it's just going to get worse.
I actually think it would be like not just underseen. I don't think it would just bomb. But I think it would be like with social media and certain clips you could pull out of context. Like I think it'd be like memed. I think people would like
Oh yeah,
attack
yeah.
this movie and like destroy it. Like I think it would be seen as like one of the worst movies of all time. Sure to be reevaluated, I'm sure eventually. But I think it's tragic how probably people would react to this nowadays.
You can see it now, can't you, on Twitter? Like, and out of context, like, oh my god, have you seen the new Wachowski movie? Someone made dialogue like this. It's like let's just hold back a second here now. This is a film about a 1960s anime and it's primarily for children. And it's almost like trying to take a scene out of Transformers and be like, "Have you heard this? Have you heard about how Shia?" It's like it's a film about fucking Hasbro toys. And it's the same thing that almost happened to Barbie as well, where people were like, "Oh my god, have you seen what they've done here? Have you seen that they've put social commentary in Barbie?" It's like, what did you think they were gonna do? Like, yeah, that's quite an interesting conversation to have because it's other than that gonna just be about a doll. Like, I think people just don't are not susceptible to have those larger conversations. When people go horror, horror, it shouldn't be political. Like, oh my god, the lack of genuine, thought provoking consideration there that suggests that horror isn't not inherently political is such an ignorant thing to state, and I just get the strong feeling that, like you said, I think we're in an issue now of just culture wars as well. And I think, again, going back to the point of who made this film, that now would be you wouldn't be able to show this in Arkansas. It's made by who? Like you just wouldn't like there would be it would be on GB News in England. Like trans filmmaker makes film for kids, and I just think that the severity of that is like, what are we doing here? Like there's no harm there at all, and that's probably the biggest concern I would have now. But I would agree with you; it would get memed to shit. It would be everywhere. It would be just bastardized by people who were just not wanting to have fun. And don't get me wrong, I think me and you were both on occasion like looked at something and maybe probably that's been too heavy handed and annihilated something, and then thought, oh, that it was fun and stuff like that. Yeah, but I just think that this doesn't have a bad bone in its body at all. And yes, I can't remember being on the Uncut Gems podcast. I would like to listen to that and see what Jakub's thoughts are, because obviously,
Well, they both hate it.
yeah, which
Spoiler alert.
which I think is interesting, knowing that he has a young kid there. Because I think that watching this with the kid on a big screen, I can't not know like oh my god, this is amazing. But again, TikTok brain, TikTok rot, and maybe not that Jakub's children have that, but I think primarily that comes with an issue as well, because people don't want to sit down and watch the film for that long, and I don't know. There's a lot of issues now, but
But also maybe the colors, like maybe this is the answer. Maybe this would hook their brains. I don't know. Again, I would pay like I want to know what kids think then. I want to know what kids think now. I think that's like one of the most fascinating points of this conversation that I just cannot find any information on.
how
Is did kids enjoy this?
how old are the kids that you teach? Who you taught? Sorry.
Teenagers.
I wonder what their thoughts would be. I think the teenage is a perfect age for it, in that it's a film that struggles between infantile and adolescence, isn't
Yeah.
it? Like it's really on the cusp, and I think you can watch this being a year older than you need to be and thinking, why is that monkey there? And you can be a year younger and be like, I love this, but I don't understand what's going on. It hits a very strange, but very direct target audience, and then the intended audience is everybody, but the target audience is so niche, and I think that's a slight overlook, but that's not to say that it can't still be just. I mean, the fact in 2008 as well, with the DVD and Blu-ray boom, like you could watch this anywhere at home. You didn't need to like, it wasn't a film where it'd be like, oh, well, you're never going to see it again. You can show this to kids like decades on from it. So time has been really good with this, and I think it will be. But it'd be fascinating to know what people. I say one thing as well, Carson, to get back to the point about film as well. Why is this not shown in film school? I think that there's a primary issue with this, and again goes back to my point of behind the scenes, is that you can't show this to someone and be like, you can make this, because it doesn't look possible. But this should be in editing courses. This should be shown to people on mise en scene. It should be shown of how to look at production design, and look at color, and look at iconography, and look at hopefully in digital 3D animation as well. It should be shown in quite a lot of a multitude of aspects at film school, just to see how this can be done, and to show that it can be done. But it isn't. It very much is one of those things where it just got lost in time. Obviously, we've done a podcast a few days ago with Uncut Gems about a film that feels by definition just came out in an era where very good, very fun, but it was just a mammoth of other films out there that just got lost. And this feels like that type of era. I mean, a year before, you've got Spider-Man 3 that like did really well by Sony, but wasn't very loved. Maybe in that year would it have done well? Because a year later, it's Avatar. So it feels like it comes at a really good time as a palette cleanser for Spider-Man, because it's too dark, and then also as a prelude to the MCU. So I don't know. Did it release at summer? Was it a big summer? I don't know. Like there's loads of things where you can look at it and be like, well, maybe it didn't do there. I don't know. I don't know.
No, I agree. But I mean, I hope now at least people know from this podcast, if nothing else, that it is worthwhile. I mean, I loved going back and watching this. I agree. This is like immediately number one, shot to 5 stars, but number two, a film like I will probably just throw on some days and just like if it's a rainy day and I have nothing else to do, like I easily could see myself throwing this on and just having a blast. Like, it's really, really enjoyable. And I think there's enough here to where it's quite meaningful also. So, I mean, I definitely appreciated this. Maybe wrapping it up, is there anything left that you want to get into or talk about with Speed Racer?
One thing, and I'll say this hand on heart: the next time I find this at the cinema, I'm watching it no matter what. I don't care where it is or where I am. I will watch this at the cinema next time I see it because there's something that I've watched it on a 65-inch television and I've watched it on my iPad. Oh, shoot me! But I think that to watch this on the biggest screen possible, knowing the soundtrack is reverberating around my head and Dolby Atmos, I need to see it then. And it's one of the things where I've seen Heat at the cinema. I've seen all the Matrix films back to back. You know, I've seen all sorts of The Shining in the cinema. I've seen all these staples of and Heat and all these films with great sound design and visionary filmmakers. I need to see this. I think it's one of the last bastions of just getting one of those ticks off. I'd love to see this shown somewhere, and I know that it'll probably be shown in Berlin a lot with the Wachowskis that obviously have an affection with Berlin, and I can imagine so. But I'd love to just see this on the biggest screen possible. So that's one last thing. But I just to end on a positive though with the film is that with a lot of people who rewatch this, it seems to be a considerable amount of people that, on retrospect, give it a higher grade, and people look at it and reappraise it. It seems that one of those films that 75 or 85% more on a second watch after the fact, or people who haven't seen it and watch it now look back on it and be like, "Oh, this is really good. This is really cool." And I hope that when the Chelsea's make more movies, or there's some sort of reappraisal or retrospect and look back at stuff. I do hope this one is slowly but surely getting its recognition it deserves. And I think now, to be fair, Carson, like what I just said, I do think that this is reappraised to a really good, strong degree. I don't think there's a mixed review consensus now. I think it very much is a oh, actually, that was actually a really good film, and we sort of cocked up about that. You know, I think the critical analysis has definitely skewed itself to go back positive. I think people look back on this now as a collective and be like, "Yeah, this is actually really good." So I feel that as much as we're doing justice to highlight this film, I'm glad in its own right, though it's definitely changed the consensus.
No, I agree. And if you at home want to watch Speed Racer, if you have not already before this podcast, please go watch it. It's available to rent and stream. A lot of places, very accessible. But Jack, let's wrap this up. Question of the week: our favorite movie involving car chases or car
This
racing.
is so
There's a lot
difficult.
of options. It's a big one. What is your favorite film in this category?
Oh my god, I'm good. The Matrix Reloaded has the best car chase ever put to screen, which is so fun considering that when you look at the two filmmakers actually made it's from the same filmographer. I find that fascinating how you've got one shot very different to another one in the space of 4 years. I think that just shows how good they are as filmmakers. Another one, Le Mans, Steve McQueen, outstanding. Stoic Steve McQueen driving a Porsche at Le Mans. Um, just brilliant. Ford v Ferrari is very good. There is one though, and I've mentioned this a few times, and my father-in-law showed me this years ago. It's from the 1970s, and there's a guy who puts an 8mm super camera on the front dash of his car in I'm sure it's the 60s or 70s, and at 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, just drives through Paris, and all you see is him going left and right, going down one-way streets the wrong way, cutting through traffic. There's nobody there. There's no police. With the roar of a car, and all you see is the front end of his car dipping up and down, dipping up and down. It's a red car. I don't know if it's a Ferrari or a Porsche, but you hear this magnificent amount of natural beauty in the world of a city still asleep, but all this like cyclone of a car engine just roaring. And at the end, he drives up to the church and meets his girlfriend and gets out of the car and gives her a kiss at the top of these stairs. And it just cuts to black. but it's a real short film, shot years and years ago, and it's always been my go-to about how to look at a car chase. It's fascinating. So those have been my 3 or 4 that I've mentioned, but I wonder what yours are going to be because I can imagine you're the car chase type of man, Carson.
Oh yeah, totally. No, you already mentioned mine. I'm so mad. Ford v Ferrari is so good.
Yeah,
It's like
really
one of
good.
those like Oscar dad movies that just like still really connects and really hits. I mean, I think the chases here are incredible. Obviously, them and Akira is really good. Um, some good car chases. But I think if you looked at racing movies, probably Ford v Ferrari. But like, there's some good ones out there. Fast Five is really fun if
Yeah,
you want just like kind of big dumb action. So, an interesting topic for sure. Let's end this off with our rapid reviews. Anything we've seen recently we haven't talked about. I will be really quick. Finishing up Hooptober, I watched Fear Street Prom Queen. I don't know why I watched it. It was lifeless. It was boring. Who cares? I watched Toby Hooper's Life Force, which is so good. What a
yes.
batshit insane, like very fun, committed to the bit, like space vampires. It's so good. Highly recommend. And then finally, starting Noir November. So after October of Noir November, I watched The Whistler,
Oh
1944, William
wow.
Castle's film. A little short, just an hour. Such a good look at like paranoia. It's about this guy who hires a hitman to kill himself, but then he learns his wife, who he thought was dead, is alive, so he doesn't want to be killed anymore. But he like can't stop it, so he's always looking over his shoulder, knowing this hitman's out to get him. I don't know if the ending really stuck the landing, just because it's so good at building tension. And then the ending is kind of just this weak fart for me.
Yeah.
But still very, very exciting. If you want like a masterclass at building that atmosphere of anxiety and paranoia, 1944 is The Whistler. Highly recommend. What have you seen recently, Jack?
I'll be very brief. I'll be try to be quick as I can. I've watched a lot of horror, so I finished all the Hellraiser sequels. If I mentioned that last time, they were just dire. I don't want to talk about them anymore. They were just dire, really bad. Nick was right. The Italian was correct. Waste of time. Um, just not very engaging. I watched the remake of Toxic Avenger. I can't quite understand what the whole hoorah about that was. That they couldn't find a distributor because it was too vile. Like, granted, I know that there's an uncut version of it and a blah blah blah, but I thought it was very uh, underwhelming in terms of, oh, like this was deemed to be unreleasable. It was fun. It wasn't bad, but it was just fun. But it wasn't something to like cry home about. It was okay. I did watch the latest Conjuring movie, which I thought was just dire. I mean, uh, just do you know, 4 films on and they're just coasting on Vera Farmiga and Patrick Wilson, who are very good in it. But even then, he just felt very slack, very lack of weight. Because the first and second films
Yeah.
really did have a feeling of like, oh, this is like a wonderful dynamic, but it just felt tired and tested. I watched Strangers.
Could you imagine Could you imagine if Patrick Wilson directed that Conjuring film, the fourth one, the final one for his character? That'd have been so beautiful, just like he did Insidious.
Well, there's going to be
Well,
another one, isn't there? I don't know. I don't.
well, no, well, now of course we have the prequel, we have the series. The Conjuring universe is back open. We thought it was over, now we're back. So that's true.
I would like to have seen Patrick Wilson make that film because it'd be interesting to see evolution as a filmmaker because it's not the type of
Yeah.
same horror as Insidious, but it was just one that wasn't very scary. I thought the iconography was very poor in it, like really
That
poor.
mirror? Come on, it's a mirror.
I, I,
How
was, I,
scary.
I didn't even know who the villain was in it. I didn't understand the point. I don't know why they were. Why was that thing being a thing? I don't know. I did watch Rennie Harlan's Strangers Chapter 1 and 2. Now I'm going to give a slight hot take here. Slight hot take here. I didn't mind the first one. And for the 3 quarters, I actually quite like the second one, which is very much like deemed to be horrifying. But it very much not to keep repeating, but it reminded me of Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. But this one like took it seriously at the hospital, and then she was like for some reason living out west and like living in the forest and like kills a big bear in it or something or a boar. I was like, what is going on here? So it lost me for a lot of it, but I thought it was interesting. It'd be interesting to see what happens in part 3 if it ever gets released. I watched Becky 1 and 2. Like Becky number 1, definitely goes there. Becky 2 feels like it just indulges in being sick. And not necessarily in a good way, but it was still engaging, but didn't feel like it was anywhere near how engaging the first one is. I did watch Dracula 2000. I don't know why. I don't know why. It was just dire. genuinely like just Gerard Butler as Dracula, not for me. On Jakub Flash's recommendation, Nicola Grasso's, I watched because I listened to an Anatomy of Adaptation. Return of Salem's Lot. No, thank you. Enough of that. Dyer. And then today I did finish watching The Mangler. Jesus, wept Carson. I mean, it's a factory pressing machine that's haunted by, and it's just I don't know what we're doing anymore. I know it's from like 1995, Robert Englund and stuff like that, but it was just like that. Stephen King sometimes just makes some absolute tripe, like rubbish stuff, like horrible rubbish stuff. And then I did watch the Naked Gun remake. I've reviewed that, so I'm fine now. I didn't mind it, but I just thought it was boring after a while. I watched Ford v Ferrari 4 times because I've been in Devon and I've had absolutely no um, internet. I watched the Da Vinci Code. I watched Slumdog Millionaire, which you couldn't make now for different reasons, but interesting. But that's all I've seen. I've been so busy, and it was just nice to not watch horror movies because I'm going to do noir soon as well, and just watch Speed Racer. So again, thank you very much for having me on. Because any excuse to talk about the Wachowskis and to just talk too much is always really. If you indulge me, you know you do, and I appreciate that. So thank you very much for inviting me. I've really enjoyed this. To just speak about Speed Racing, to watch it was really interesting and really fun anyway.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wanted to rewatch this, and I thought it was a good conversation. I'm so happy did revisit this, and also I think it's a good lead-in because for the rest of this month and probably at least one episode next month, the podcast is going to do a little mini series, an unofficial series, looking at the works of Francis Ford Coppola. Specifically, It's really a series we kind of started. Myself and Nick did a Patreon video about One from the Heart and talked about kind of the narrative and career of Coppola and how he brings madness to the screen. And we're going to do what are we going to do? We are going to do Apocalypse Now, then we're going to do Tucker, the Man in His Dream, and then we're going to do Megalopolis. Probably Megalopolis will be next month. And I think actually some of the themes we talked about here about trying to push what film can be and evolve what can be seen on screen, especially when we get to Megalopolis, is going to be super relevant. So I think this was a good kind of even like precursor to that little series. So for that, we will see you next time. Jack, where can we find you on social media?
You can find me with the username at Jak-Luke Sharp on Twitter. I don't really use it, but you can find me on there if it's even called that anymore. Letterboxd, we can find my reviews, and then Clapper.
Yeah, you can find me on Letterboxd and Blue Sky at Carson Timar, Words on Clapper and Buttered Popcorn, and obviously here on ClapperCast. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us talk about Speed Racer today, and we will see you next time as we start our Coppola series. Goodbye.